Casper, I know you have been involved in issues of technology. You were one of the first diplomats to actually represent your country next to the technology companies in Silicon Valley. So now you are in Europe again. So what are European policymakers responding to in terms of artificial intelligence that is central to the debate, how they have taken this role of developing safeguards on emerging technologies? What are the main challenges for policymakers in their quest to make tech companies accountable, and how technology companies can engage with policymakers to ensure that it is a two-way street?
So I have 2 hours to answer that question, right? Or I shall try and make it fairly quick. Now, listen, I think there is a big debate here in Europe, and I'm speaking to you from Brussels about the future role of Europe as Europe trailing behind on technology issues or on digitalization issues. And if you look at the data set, there are some indications that we're not building and scaling the same number of big technology companies in Europe. And I think there is a real interest, as we've seen also with the new European Commission, who defined everything digital as one of the key priority areas together with climate change and sustainability. But I think there is one misconception about Europe, and that is in terms of regulating technology, in terms of setting the guardrails around technology, Europe in many ways is perhaps the global superpower. We've seen that with the general data protection regulation on privacy issues. It began here in Europe, but it's now spreading across the world. Many countries are now adopting what is basically the same as GDPR. And you were asking about artificial intelligence. And what I would say is that the first point here is, and this will come as a shocking surprise to you, that of course, from my point of view and from the point of view of Microsoft, we think AI holds enormous potential. Basically improving healthcare. If you look at what happened during COVID-19, if we didn't have machine learning systems, if we didn't have AI systems, we wouldn't have been able to respond and mitigate the global crisis in the way that we've done. And I think the fundamental point here is that it doesn't really matter what area, what sector you're looking at, AI is going to be a game changer. Now, that said, it is of course also incredibly important that the right guardrails are set down on AI so that you don't have biases, that you make sure that there are governance structures around it, that it's inclusive, and that it's fair and gives opportunities to everybody. And I think this is an area where Europe plays an absolutely essential role, and where we really welcome the plans that has been formulated in this so-called white paper that the European Commission has published.
And how is Microsoft engaging with European policymakers in matters of peace and security in cyberspace? And what is on the European cybersecurity agenda in the coming quarter?
Well, if you look at what's happening on cybersecurity, and again, I would actually use COVID-19 as one example, we've probably seen 2 or 3 years of digitalization happening in just a couple of months because of our need to respond to COVID-19. That has been fantastic to watch, and we're doing this interview online. We perhaps would have met in person if it wasn't for COVID-19. Similarly, you have literally millions of people in Europe or indeed around the world that have been able to work, keep up productivity because of access to 21st century technology. But of course, the price that you pay with going digital is, we just a few days ago saw the UN publish this new e-governance index and what countries are doing really well, what countries need to invest more in it. The problem with being very digitalized is, of course, that you also bring vulnerabilities in terms of cyber attacks or the need to increase cyber security. And governments have the ultimate responsibility, of course, international organizations as well. But what I think and what I believe is the private sector will have to step up to the plate and really deliver in cybersecurity as well. Just a few days ago, we through a civil case took down a very big cybersecurity criminal network that was pestering and using COVID-19 to attack healthcare officials. That's one example of how we're trying to engage, but also on the norms discussion that are very much taking place in the UN through the open-ended working group and the UN group of governmental experts, sort of the traffic rules of cybersecurity. The private sector is engaged in that. But we're also working together with European institutions, ENISA being one example, through something called the NIST directive, which is the standards around cybersecurity. So you have, the guardrails being created by the norms discussion, but the standards discussion is really about making sure that in our infrastructure and our devices that are minimum standards that will make sure that you are less vulnerable to cyber attacks. And I think that's a helpful way forward. And again, you're bringing a multi-stakeholder gathering together. I think is the only way to respond, especially at a time where the pace of new technology development is perhaps unprecedented.
And how will the Danish project present opportunities for international cooperation, and in which ways will Microsoft support its development?
I think let me try. That's better now. Well, I think the point here is that there isn't really an option for us not to collaborate closer together between the private sector and the public sector. One aspect is indeed the norms discussion, where we are heavily engaged together with other companies at the UN level. We've been, I think, a partner also for the UN high-level panel on digital cooperation that came forward with a report that is now being implemented, where you look at how can you bring the UN forward as a player on technology issues, on digital issues. We've actually established now an office, a Microsoft office in New York for UN affairs, and my colleague John Frank is heading that office, which also shows that our engagement with the UN is being increased. But I think also in terms of what we are doing in Europe, I would mention, the Paris call, which is part of the Paris Peace Forum, as a super important venue where cybersecurity issues is being put forward. You have more than 1,000 signatures, both from the private sector and from the public sector, in acknowledging that cybersecurity is not something on the fringes of what we should focus on. It's really right, left, center in everything we do. Unfortunately, because we have people out there that are using these new technologies as a way of attacking us, attacking our critical infrastructure, attacking our hospitals right now. So I think in all these areas, we have an important role to play to make sure that we ring fence fundamental values, that we do everything we can to make sure that our technology is as safe as possible, or we cannot do it alone. And that's why you really need international collaboration, which is based on key values, democracy, human rights, etc.
Thank you very much. A pleasure speaking with you, Casper Klynge, Vice President of European Affairs for Microsoft. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.